Digging up the past. Why archaeology matters. Y'all ever wonder about them stories in the good book? There's more to them than just words on a page. That's where archaeology comes in, folks. It's like digging up the past with a big old spoon, trying to find out what really happened way back when. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the thrill of uncovering something that's been buried for thousands of years. Archaeology ain't just about finding cool stuff to put in museums, though. It's about piecing together the puzzle of our past. It's about understanding where we came from and how we got to where we are today. So grab your shovels, folks, because we're about to go on one heck of a journey through time. Now, let's talk about one of the most famous stories in the Bible, Noah and his big old boat. Y'all know the tale. God tells Noah to build an ark, fill it with animals, and then sends a flood to wash away all the sinners. But did it really happen? Well, that's where things get a bit muddy. Back in the 1940s, a fella named Robert Ballard, the same guy who found the Titanic, went looking for evidence of a great flood in the Black Sea. And wouldn't you know it, he found some. Turns out about 7,000 years ago, there was a massive flood in that area. Now that ain't exactly worldwide, but it sure would have seemed like it to the folks living there at the time. But what about the ark itself? Well, there's been more false alarms on that front than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Until then, we'll just have to keep on digging and wondering. All right, let's mosey on over to Jericho. Now, according to the good book, Joshua and his army marched around the city walls for 7 days, blowing their trumpets. On the 7th day, they gave a mighty shout, and them walls came a-tumbling down. Sounds like quite a spectacle, don't it? Well, archaeologists have been digging around Jericho for over 100 years now. And let me tell you, they've found some mighty interesting things. For starters, Jericho is one of the oldest cities in the world. People have been living there for over 11,000 years. That's older than dirt itself, I reckon. In the 1950s, a British archaeologist named Kathleen Kenyon dug up Jericho and found that the walls had indeed fallen down. Either way, it's clear that something big went down in Jericho. Now, let's talk about everyone's favorite underdog turned top dog, King David. The Bible tells us he went from being a humble shepherd boy to the greatest king Israel ever had. But for a long time, folks wondered if he was just a legend. After all, where was the proof? Well, in 1993, archaeologists hit the jackpot. They found a stone tablet in northern Israel with the words House of David carved on it. This was the first time David's name had been found outside the Bible. In 2005, they found what might be King David's palace in Jerusalem. It's a huge building from the right time period, sitting right where the Bible says David's palace should be. There's real history mixed in with those stories, and that's pretty darn exciting if you ask me. Now let's talk about one of the biggest stories in the Bible, the Exodus. You know, Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, parting the Red Sea, wandering in the desert for 40 years. It's a tale as old as time. But is there any proof it really happened? Well, I hate to break it to you, but finding evidence for the Exodus has been tougher than trying to nail jelly to a tree. You'd think with all them people wandering around the desert for 40 years, they'd have left some trash behind. But so far, archaeologists haven't found much of anything from that time period in the Sinai Desert. But don't you go losing faith just yet. There are some interesting tidbits that might point to some truth in the story. For example, there's evidence that a whole bunch of Canaanite-speaking people showed up in Canaan around the time the Exodus was supposed to have happened. Either way, archaeologists are still out there, combing the desert, hoping to find some sign of Moses and his people. All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about them infamous cities of sin, Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, the good book tells us God rained down fire and brimstone on these wicked cities, leaving nothing but ashes and a pillar of salt. But did it really happen? Well, hold on to your hats, because this is where things get interesting. In the 1970s, archaeologists found a whole bunch of cities in the area around the Dead Sea that had been destroyed around 2000 BC. That's right about when Sodom and Gomorrah were supposed to have been wiped out. And get this, they found evidence of burning and destruction that was hotter than a firecracker on the 4th of July. Now, some folks reckon this destruction was caused by a big old earthquake that set off natural gas deposits in the area. Now, we can't say for sure if this was God's wrath or just Mother Nature throwing a fit, but it sure does make you think, don't it? Now, let's talk about the big kahuna himself, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Josh, ain't there plenty of proof Jesus existed? Well, yes and no. We got lots of writings about Jesus from his followers, but finding physical evidence? That's been trickier than a greased pig at a county fair. One of the biggest finds was in Caesarea back in 1961. Archaeologists dug up a stone with an inscription mentioning Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who ordered Jesus' crucifixion. Now, that don't prove Jesus existed, but it sure does show that some of the people in his story were real, historical figures. Then there's Nazareth itself. For a long time, some folks argued that Nazareth didn't even exist in Jesus' time. As for Jesus himself, well, that's where things get sticky. Now, let me tell you about one of the most exciting finds in biblical archaeology, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These ain't just any old pieces of paper, folks. These are some of the oldest copies of the Bible we've ever found. And they turned up in the most unlikely place, a bunch of caves near the Dead Sea. The story goes that in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy was looking for a lost goat when he tossed a rock into a cave. Instead of a bleat, he heard the sound of breaking pottery. When he went to look, he found jars full of ancient scrolls. These scrolls turned out to be a big old library of Jewish texts, including the oldest known copies of books from the Old Testament. It just goes to show some things stand the test of time. Well, folks, we've been on quite a journey, haven't we? We've dug through the sands of time, looking for traces of Noah's Ark, King David's palace, and even Jesus himself. And you know what? There's still plenty more to find. That's why archaeologists keep on digging day in and day out under the hot sun and in the dusty caves. Now, some of you might be wondering, why bother? Ain't the Bible enough? Well, let me tell you, archaeology ain't about proving or disproving the Bible. It's about understanding it better. It's like looking at an old family photo album. Sure, you know the stories, but seeing the actual places and objects brings those stories to life in a whole new way. And who knows? Maybe someday someone will dig up something that changes everything we thought we knew. So keep your eyes peeled and your shovels ready, because you never know what might turn up next. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.